Salams and welcome. Thank you for joining me in the English reading and the rendition of the Holy Quran, translation and commentary by Abdullah, Yusuf, A'lee, published by the Islamic Propagation Center International from Durban, South Africa. And today we are starting chapter number 12, a wonderful, magnificent and beautiful chapter known as Surah Yusuf, the Prophet Joseph. And we all know his magnificent and beautiful story. And in this case, his entire story is in one chapter and not in various places in the Quran. There's magnificent life lessons, family lessons of betrayal and hope and patience and so on. But let's get immediately into it. A magnificent, wonderful surah, chapter number 12, Surah Yusuf. And you know the story wonderfully. But no matter how many times we read it, we always are fascinated by the lessons and the wisdom and the story of victory after so much trials and tribulations. Right, let's start with it. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Introduction to Surah number 12, Surah Yusuf. In subject matter, this surah is entirely taken up with the story recapitulated rather than told of Joseph, the youngest but one of the 12 sons of the patriarch Jacob. The youngest but one just means that there was one younger than him known as Benjamin or Benjamin. The story is called the most beautiful of stories for many reasons, and that is mentioned in verse number 3, for many reasons. Firstly, the story is the most detailed of any story in the Quran. Secondly, the story is full of human vicissitudes and has therefore deservedly appealed to men and women of all classes. Thirdly, the story paints its vivid colors with their spiritual implications, the most varied aspects of life, the patriarch's old age, and the confidence between him and his little best beloved son, and the elder brother's jealousy of this little son, their plot and their father's grief, and the sale of the father's darling into slavery for a miserable little price. Carnal love contrasted with purity and chastity, false charges, prison, the interpretation of dreams, low life and high life, innocence raised to honor, the sweet revenge of forgiveness and benevolence, high matters of state and administration, humility and exaltation, filial love, and the beauty of piety and truth. So there's many stories, many lessons that one can learn from this beautiful, magnificent story. One of the most beautiful chapters, one of the most beautiful stories in the Quran. And the Quran itself is saying that it is one of the most beautiful stories, as we see in verse number 3. The story is similar to, but not identical with, the biblical story, but the atmosphere is wholly different. The biblical story is like a folk tale in which morality has no place. Its tendency is to exalt the clever and financially minded Jew against the Egyptian, and to explain certain ethnic and tribal peculiarities in later Jewish history. Joseph is shown, now this is in the Bible. Joseph is shown as buying up all the cattle in the land of the poor Egyptians for the state under the stress of famine conditions, and making the Israelites rulers over Pharaoh's castle. In contrast to that, the Quranic story is beautiful. The Quranic story, on the other hand, is less a narrative than a highly spiritual sermon or allegory explaining the seeming contradictions in life, the enduring nature of virtue in a world full of flux and change, and the marvelous working of God's eternal purpose in His plan as unfolded to us on the white canvas of history. This aspect of the matter has been a favorite with Muslim poets and Sufi exegetists, and is further referred to in Appendix 6 at the end of the surah in connection with Jami's great Persian masterpiece, Yusuf or Zulaikha. And when I get a chance, inshallah, we'll read the appendix as well. Ameen. Summary. Let's look at verses 1 to 20. Life is a dream and a vision to be explained by stories and parables, as in the perspicuous Arabic Quran. The truth which Joseph, the man of God saw in his vision was unpalatable to his 10 half-brothers who plotted against him and sold him into slavery to a merchant for a few pieces of silver. Then in verses 21 to 42, Joseph was taken by the merchant into Egypt, was bought by a great Egyptian court dignitary, the Aziz, who adopted him. The dignitary's wife sought, but in vain, to attract Joseph to the delights of earthly love. His resistance brought him disgrace and imprisonment, but he taught the truth even in prison and was known for his kindness. One of his fellow prisoners, to whom he had interpreted a dream, was released and received into the favor as the king's cup-bearer. Then in verses 43 to 68, the king had a vision, which Joseph, through the cupbearer, got an opportunity of explaining. Joseph insisted that all the scandal that had been raised about him should be publicly cleared. He was received into favor and was appointed wazir, as the leader, as wazir by the king. His half-brothers, driven by famine, came to Egypt and were treated kindly by Joseph without their knowing his identity. He asks them to bring his full brother, the youngest son Benjamin. And then in verses 69 to 93, Joseph detains Benjamin, and by a stratagem convicts his half-brothers of the hatred and crime against himself. He forgives them and sends them to bring Jacob and the whole family from Canaan to Egypt. Israel, Jacob, Yaqub alayhi salam comes. So Jacob is known as Israel, known as Yaqub alayhi salam, with giving birth to 12 children, the 12 tribes of Israel. Comes, is comforted, and settles in Egypt. The name of God is glorified. The truth of God endures forever, and God's purpose is fully revealed in the hereafter, as we see in verses 94 to 111, and there are 111 verses in this beautiful, magnificent chapter of the Quran. Right, so let's start with the chapter 12, verses 1 to 20, the rhyming commentary. Life and wisdom are explained by signs, symbols, parables, and moving stories in the Holy Quran. A beautiful story is that of Joseph, the best beloved son of Jacob. His future greatness was prefigured in a vision, but his brothers were filled with envy and hate. They plotted to get rid of him and threw him down into a well. Some merchants found him, bound for Egypt. The brothers sold him into slavery for a few silver coins. Him, the noblest man of his age, marked out by God for a destiny of greatness, righteousness, and benevolence. What a magnificent summary of this beautiful, beautiful chapter. Join me in the next episode, which will be starting with chapter number 12 and part number 2, which is Surah Yusuf or Joseph in the Quran. Stay well, look after yourself. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.